Welcome to those joining our conversation tonight. My name is Luke de Voller. I'm the rector of Trinity Church of the Green on the Green, and it's such an honor to have this conversation happening in our community. A warm welcome to the audience here tonight, for people from Trinity on the Green, members of the Episcopal Church, and then also beyond that, so many people here are practitioners of choral music in general. So welcome especially to the panel members. Ranjit will introduce them in a minute. Just a practical note I want to bring to the attention that this meeting is being recorded in case you don't feel comfortable with it. So just that you know, you can jump off right now. But our panel tonight was inspired by many conversations we have had at Trinity about the growing awareness regarding racism and the impact of racism in us and around us, and also in the practice of singing and dealing with music. So tonight's conversation is a place to begin these conversations and to broaden our musical horizon with humility, love, and respect, as a way in which we are committed to justice and undoing racism in our community and in our own life. It's a learning path, and we really want to honor how important this is to undo these structures of white supremacy and oppression. If it's okay with you, I would like to offer a prayer to our meeting here tonight to open. It's a collect for the human family found in our Book of Common Prayer. So welcome again, and let us pray. O God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love, and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your promises on earth. Then in your good time, all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Before we go further, I really want to extend a word of gratitude to everyone at Trinity who has been working very hard to make this conversation happen. Walden, Heidi, and Kyle in particular here tonight. Thank you so much. And then much gratitude also to our facilitator and moderator tonight, the Reverend Ranjit Koshi Matthews. Ranjit, great to have you with us tonight. You are the Canon of Mission Advocacy, Racial Justice, and Reconciliation in our Episcopal Church here in Connecticut. You have served before as the rector of St. James, New London, and also as the partnership officer for Africa on the presiding bishop's staff of our Episcopal Church. So I now pass this over to you to help introduce our panelists and facilitate this evening's conversation. Thank you so much, Ranjit.
Thank you so much, Luke. So kind, and I'm just so delighted that Trinity Church on the Green is just hosting this conversation, which I think is just incredibly important for this time and space, and really is a brave space for us. So just really just deeply appreciate your church and you all for being in this space. It's so important. I also want to say for folks that, you know, as we move through and hear all that we might hear this evening, I want us to just remind us that this will be a safe space, but it may not be a comfortable space. And I just want to hold all of that. So I'm going to invite you again. It will definitely be a safe space, but it may not be comfortable. And I would invite just sort of a holy curiosity as we move through all that will unfold in the hour that we share together. And with that, I want to just share who we have on our panel, and then I'll invite them to share a bit about themselves. We have Dr. Nathaniel Gumbs. We have Dr. Sandra T. Montes. We have Walden Moore, and we have Janet Ye. And without further ado, I just want to invite Dr. Gumbs, if you just share a bit about yourself.
Good evening. My name is Nathaniel Gums. I am a director of chapel music here at Yale University. I shouldn't say here, but at Yale University. Um, I'm glad to be here. A great friend of Walden Moore. Janet Ye is like a little sister to me. Um, and I'm just glad to be a part of this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Gums. Janet, would you please kindly introduce yourself?
Of course, my name is Janet Ye, and I have just begun in January as Director of Music at Church of the Heavenly Rest on the Upper East Side here in New York City. Before that, I was Associate Organist at Trinity Wall Street, and even before that, when I was a student at the Yale ISM, was an organ scholar at Trinity Church on the Green in New Haven. So very happy to be here and to see so many familiar faces.
Janet, thank you. Dr. Montes, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Hi, I come to you from the land stolen from the great Lenape Nation and other indigenous siblings. And I am an Indigena Latina, and I am Dean of Chapel at Union Theological Seminary.
Thank you, Dr. Montes. And Walden, please.
Good evening. I'm Walden Moore. I'm the Director of Music at Trinity on the Green, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone tonight, and I look forward to learning, hopefully, more than I can share.
Thank you, Walden, and thank you all so much for that, just sharing a little bit about yourselves. And I would invite you to take a deeper dive in what has been shared about all of these fantastic panels that we have. That is information that was shared earlier. Now, folks, our event is called Intentional Diversity in Music, in Church and Choral Music. Again, intentional diversity in church and choral music. And let's dive deep into that. First off, I just want to invite Dr. Gums, just a question around, really diving into it. What does it mean? What does it mean to appropriate? What is appropriation? And how do you think of appropriation in your own musical practice?
Yeah, great question. So I've been wrestling with this. Not we, but I consider the post Floyd era, post George Floyd era, and I'm seeing left and right ways everyone wants to include. All organists now are playing music by Black composers. So all churches are now doing spirituals. All churches make sure we have to have a Black composer now, a woman composer. And I'm wondering, I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful. I call Florence Price the new J.S. Bach. Everyone's playing Florence Price in organ recitals now. And a part of me is excited about it, and a part of me wonders how authentic it is, because this music isn't new. The music wasn't written recently, and even the programming, it's always sandwiched in somewhere. It's like, we're going to put the main composers, we're going to end programs with Duraflay, we're going to start with Bach, but make sure we throw Price in the middle to say we're not racist, So I'm always wondering, it's a thin line though. I'm always wondering, I appreciate, like I said, the music is being put out there. It's been more and more is being published. But I'm still thinking of ways in which it's not appropriation, or just say it's done. Even here at Yale, University Church at Yale, our pastor Ian and my predecessor Patrick Evans was really big on global music. Something that's probably my downfall. I don't really know. I haven't really studied or know the music that well, or various languages that well, to actually feel comfortable doing it. And I'm always the one pushing back, saying I don't want to do it. And not because I'm against global music, but I'm very serious and true to doing music in the style and the context in which it should be performed. And not just saying, oh, we're doing this Chinese piece because we have Chinese students in here, or we're doing this African piece because we have African students here. And I think it's doing the music a disjustice or harming in music just to say we're doing it, but it's still doing it with piano and it sounds just like Americans singing this music. So even go further with the Negro spirituals. I was asked this question. I was actually taken aback. It was 2 years ago. No, it was 2 years ago. A Yale student asked me, is it appropriate for white people to sing spirituals? And I couldn't answer right away. I did some reading, some research, some studying, and trying to understand what's the best way. I called some mentors. And I think I finally landed with the answer of yes, it's appropriate. However, it should be taken as serious or the same integrity as you would learning J.S. Bach, or you would learning Brahms, or you learning Duruflé Requiem. So appropriation, I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of, even when we do it here at Marquand Chapel, where we'll sing some Duraflame, we'll sing some howls, but when we sing the gospel stuff or the Black music, oh, that was fun. I'm like, this is not really fun music, you know? So I'm saying all this to say that I appreciate, and I guess appreciate is the best word, to see more music ministries or more churches or more schools and more classical musicians engage or embrace music of color or music outside of the Western canon. However, I just pray that everyone who does this is not doing it out of appropriation, but doing it with the same integrity as they took learning the Western canon, because it's special music. It's precious music. I mean, I have stories for days growing up in Trinity Baptist Church. They call the Episcopal Church in the Bronx. And we did everything. We did all music. And I appreciate all music because of my upbringing. But we did everything with such high quality. And I mean, these are Black folks chanting psalmody. I mean, that's not something that's common in the Black tradition, but they were so eager to learn what everyone was doing. My pastor lived at St. Thomas Fifth Avenue, and he wanted his church to be a diverse church. And he went the same mile that he took to learn Precious Lord, Take My Hand, to have his church singing Psalm 100 as the congregation. So I think in all cases, in churches, as performing artists, that we do take the same approach in learning the serious literature. And I consider it serious to me as well. Kirk Franklin, Richard Smallwood, Donald Lawrence, all of this music the same way. I think I answered the question. I think I answered.
Yeah, Dr. Gums for days. Yeah, thank you so much for that, and for the rich integrity that that it takes just to, if we're gonna play music in particular ways. And thank you for that, Dr. Gums. And Janet, if I may just ask you in certainly in connection to what I asked Dr. Gums, but what would you say, what is at stake when people sing music from a racial or cultural heritage that is different from their own?
It's an important question. I think it's one that conductors and organists and directors of choirs are thinking about a lot these days. And there were two words that Nat used that I think are really important here, authenticity and context, and really doing the work to do this research. So a project that I have been working on for the last year has been for the National Church, for the Episcopal Church, and it is serving on a worship committee for this summer's General Convention in Baltimore. They have put together a really wonderful programmatic plan of how morning services will go over the week-long meetings and the week-long opportunity, with everybody being there together from every diocese across the US. And so the work that I'm doing is actually an AAPI heritage morning prayer service. What's been really fascinating for me about this, and my parents and grandparents are originally from Taiwan, so that's my background. What's been fascinating for me about this is working with colleagues, a committee of clergy and lay people from across the United States of Asian heritage, and thinking about what that means for us in this particular place and time. So what we've had to do over the last 6 months to a year is see how we can represent aspects of culture, knowing we can't represent every aspect and everything that might fall under that umbrella of AAPI. If you, for example, might think of a Spanish service, which will happen during that week. Spanish is a spoken language that can unite people of so many different cultural backgrounds. And with an AAPI service, we're trying to bring together people who speak different languages and who come from different generations of immigrant families. There are dioceses in Asia that belong to the Episcopal Church and which are part of the Greater Anglican Communion. There are 140 at least Asian Episcopal churches here in the US. So it's a great large group of people with different feelings about all of this. And where we landed was thinking very seriously about not doing something that is right at the surface level. So something at the surface level might be, something that's a cultural sort of lantern dragon festival service. We wanted to dig deeper than that and think very intentionally about what might be the common language. And it turns out that the common language for that is music. Which is something that's really wonderful. And so in my work looking through the music, it's taken sifting through a lot of different hymnals, sifting through materials from the Diocese of Osaka and books that I've brought back from traveling to Hong Kong and Malaysia and Taiwan and Japan, and honoring composers from those backgrounds. And what I discovered, which is actually pretty similar to the very recent journey with the Amplify Female Composers Project that my colleague Carolyn Craig and I embarked on, is that when you start looking, there is a lot there. The music is not new, and it just takes time and intention. And so we're going to be able to highlight historical composers of Asian heritage, new composers of music that exist in hymnals and traditions other than our own, like the Presbyterian Glory to God hymnal. And we hope to be able to do it and not say this is sort of the end all be all, but to say this is just the beginning of this kind of cultural work that we hope to do that represents people that are in our pews in the American Episcopal Church. So that's just sort of one slice of something that I have been thinking about with this question.
Thank you so much, Janet. It's a lot there, and there's a lot that we've heard from Dr. Gums and you, and I hope it's sparking questions and thoughts from our audience, and in terms of intention, integrity, authenticity, how we walk and do this work with all of those words really close to our heart. And I want to ask Dr. Montes, how can we, given what Dr. Gums and Janet has shared, how do we then expand the diversity of the music we love and in respectful and life-giving ways? How do we expand that?
So when thank you so much. I'm over here, high-fiving, amening, just the words that I'm not supposed to say during Lent, because that's exactly, the things that I talk about all the time. But when I thought about the question of how can we expand the music we love, right? Personally, that was a question. So when I was married to my ex-husband, I did not like Tejano music. Like, if you know anything about Selena, that's Tejano music. And I just didn't like it. I just did not like it. I come from Peru, through Guatemala, the United States. But he liked it. So then I started listening to it every single day because, I loved my ex-husband, right? And so I was in love. I was like, oh my gosh, this is okay. I want to, go out with him and dance, etc. And now it's one of my favorite genres of music. And so what I had to do was intentionally, like we talked about, and authentically listen to authentic Tejano music, and to expand my own knowledge. And I am one of those people that I love anything that's new and different, worldly, and all that stuff. That's the kind of music I like. And even if I don't really like it or it doesn't resonate very well with me, I still continue to listen to it because it's important to somebody in the pews, right? It's important to somebody outside of our pews, which, that's even more important for us, right? As people who follow Jesus, who want to bring people to Jesus, not to the Episcopal Church, but to Jesus. And so for me, that is really important for us to actually think, what can I learn today? What kind of music, can I think about that sounds cool? Like right now I'm writing, different notes about, what other kind of music I want to listen to. I don't need to know the language to enjoy it. I listen to a bunch of different music. When I visit my son in Canada, I mean, that's a whole other kind of music, a lot of French music, not from France, but, from Canada. And it's just really cool. Like, I mean, I think I speak it, I'm over here singing it, in the shower and thinking I speak it too and stuff. But so one of the things that I don't agree with Dr. Gums is that I don't think you have to, like, I don't use that as an excuse. And I'm not saying he is, but I've heard this so much from my white siblings that they will use, oh, I don't speak Spanish, or I've never sang a Negro spiritual, or, I don't have the background to not ever try a song that is in our hymnal or in our, the approved hymnals from the church. And for me, that's no longer excusable, because you have people in your pews that look and sound totally different from you. And it's not about you, but it's about the body of God. So for me, and if you don't have it around in your church, I bet you $100 right now that as soon as you go outside of your church, you have that kind of people that need to hear the gospel, that want to hear the gospel in their language and their, genres that they prefer. So I think that those are the things. So for me, if you want to expand your knowledge, just like when we go to school, just like when I've had to expand my knowledge of Episcopal hymnody, just try out, listen to a radio that does not sound like something you like. When I started listening to some, country music, that was really tough for me. But, hey, I started liking some songs too, so just try it out. It's, just like when you go to a new restaurant and you're like, I don't know if I like it, just try it out, and then try it again. And then again, don't give up, because there are people outside and that need to hear Jesus. I want to see myself. I want to hear the stuff that makes me just, excited and grateful to be at church. It shouldn't just be Western music all the time. That's not life-giving to a bunch of us. So so that's what I suggest, just be involved in it. And just one more thing, don't call me yet, Ranjit, but one more thing. If you have like friends, if all of your friends look exactly like you, you're doing 2022 wrong. Like Dr. Gums was saying, after, before Floyd, after Floyd, this time that's no longer acceptable. Get yourself some friends who do not look, sound, or like, or speak like you do, because that is exactly what this world needs. I mean, we've seen what this world needs, and that is exactly it. We all need to learn from each other, and that's it. I think, just learn from each other, love each other, and, act as though you're falling in love with somebody who likes that kind of genre of music, and try it.
Yeah. I mean, Dr. Montes, there's a lot of intentionality there, right? And being open and trying it, right? And for some folks that might be hard, right? To take that step, but it's the invitation, right? To try, right? And Walden, how do we intentionally embrace that diversity, right? With some intention, not only in church music but also in choral music. Well, how do we intentionally do that work, embrace?
We have to make it become, as Nat described, not something that we we make sure we check the box, let's say, to put in a piece by a composer, along with, well, as Nat said, we'll begin with Duraflay, we'll put something in by Florence Price in the middle and stuff like that. We need to get to the point that we look and explore the music enough that it truly is simply a part of what we do all the time, as easily as all the other things that we do. An example I can give is, for example, right now, we've only been singing regularly since February 1st in terms of a real full schedule. I mean, we did sing in the fall, but it was on a diminished basis. And of course, come January with Omicron, we just took an extra long Christmas big break because of Omicron. So we only have been singing about 6 weeks. So we had to get ready all of our music very quickly for our for Holy Week, for Easter. We have a spring concert coming up and so forth. So we had to do all this. So what do? We fall back on that which we know. And what I realized was that okay, I'm having to fall back right now. But what's disappointing to me is that I don't have a lot of diverse music to fall back on. In other words, that to me says to me, okay, here's what I need to do in the coming time in the next few years. You see, this library happens to be the room I'm sitting in right now. That library needs to intentionally be built with different composers, different kinds of music. We have plenty of music of Herbert Howells, Herbert, this and the other things that you would normally maybe expect that up to this point you would have found. We need to intentionally turn our attention to spend the budget on things to look. And I saw Sandra posted it in the chat a little while ago. It takes time. It takes a lot of time to do the research. Carolyn and Janet have been extremely helpful, for example, just in the work they've done with their project of amplify female composers and so forth. And there are resources. Marcus Garrett has done a lot of good resources out there where we can find things, but you have to really study. The resources are there. They're online. It isn't as though we have to wait for the library to open. We can go and get them online, so they're there. But they have to be absorbed, and this is something I need to do. As I say, I fully expect to come away from this session with having learned far more than I to contribute, and I think that that's the attitude I hope to keep in doing this and in trying to do it, is that we have so much to learn and not a lot of time to do it. So we therefore have to set our priorities carefully. So I'm already thinking, okay, the spring concert is upon us next week. I've had to go with that, which we had actually prepared before the pandemic. So I'm carrying out a plan that we had for April of 2020. But I'm already thinking about, we've got Christmas coming up. Well, it's just around the corner. What I can do in Christmas is very different, and I've got time. And if I don't, it's my fault. It's my fault if I don't find the stuff because it's out there. It's there. And I mean, even on this screen, I'm looking at a lot of people that I can turn to for advice, for repertoire suggestions, and so forth. And if I don't take advantage of that, again, it's my doing. It's a shortfall on my part. That's my intentionality.
Right. Walden, thank you, and thank you all for those really fine, I mean, just deep and purposeful responses to it all, and yet we also understand very clearly, as you all have mentioned, that we are in a different place now in the United States, after the pandemic, and certainly after George Floyd was murdered, and realizing how tethered many of us are to a system of white supremacy, not only in our church but in our broader society. And what can this work do with some intentionality around racial justice, not racial reconciliation? I think we're far away from any sort of racial reconciliation. But how do we then do the work with some intentionality, with some authenticity around racial justice, and leading that, so that we, as we build prayer and build music into all of it, we're actually forming ourselves as people of God who are following the way of Jesus. So I want to, I mean, just draw that open to the broader group of how do we do that racial justice work that may be a part of this intentionality. So yeah, Janet.
Well, I think one really important part of this is that I think a lot of us in this group work with young people. And I think a lot of our young people are holding a mirror up to us, whether it's working with children who are in children's choirs with us. And I think that is some of the most important work that we do. They're actually keeping us honest. And it's really important to have tough conversations with them. Those conversations can be couched in very simple things like, why are we singing this composer? But it can also really be connected to a lot of the work that hopefully our church is doing in our neighborhoods, and the social justice and the racial justice that work that we are doing in our communities. And so I think music can absolutely play a role in that, and that if we don't do that, it's increasingly conspicuous, perhaps. And again, I think just the role of education, not only for kids, but also for our congregations, to have these conversations together and to say, you know, why are we hearing music that might be new and fresh, and why is it there? And what is the role of music in American history? What have spirituals meant to us over the years as very political statements, in fact, you know, not being shy about that.
Right. And noticing, Janet, that, you know, this is all very political work, deeply political. It's not partisan political, but it is political in that it's in and of the people, right? So claiming that as sort of as we move through liturgy. How about any others? Any of our other panelists that want to chime in around this sort of racial justice work that might be a part of this ongoing work around intentionality and embracing diversity? Where do we any thoughts or ponderings around any of that, or certainly any of the other opportunities? Yeah, Nathaniel, I saw that you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I've seen someone. Oh, was it Mark? He
Yeah.
threw a
I
couple.
I don't want to lose something that you said, Janet, which is really great. And that is, I think it's important to ask kids what they're listening to. I don't think it's healthy or good for an Episcopal Church musician. I'm an Episcopal Church musician in New Jersey. Certainly, I don't sit around and listen to rap and Drake and Lil Baby, but I know who they are, and I know who Drake is, and I know what the issues are around Drake, and the issues around street creds and colorism. And that's what kids are listening to. They're listening to hip hop and listening to R&B. I've got kids who listen to Depeche Mode, which I sort of missed because I'm going to be 62 on Thursday, and that sort of wasn't my thing. I want to remember two things that Horace Boyer once told me. You might remember that he was the editor of the Lift Every Voice and Sing 2 hymnal. He said to me, I asked him some of the questions that you all are asking, and he said, do you think that Leontine Price said, oh no, I can't sing Tosca because it's European music? No, she didn't do that. And he said to me something that I've always stuck with me. He said, you know, American popular music is brown. That if you watch American Idol or any of those shows, I don't, everybody wants to be Aretha or Whitney or Beyonce or Black Parade, you know, I mean, I want to be Aretha. I don't know. You know, and so I want to tack that on to the excellent thing that you just said, Janet, because I thought that was really kids. It really, and that's what we do. I mean, choir's Christian formation and community, and especially for kids. So thank you, Janet.
I didn't mean to put Mark on the spot. Sorry, Mark. I was referring to your comment in the chat. I'm sorry about that. About various hymnals. And I wanted to just say that even in this space, I mean, there's no secret that there's lots of racial tension here at Yale University. But something about Marquand Chapel, though, since I was a student back in 2009, when I was a chapel organist, to 2011, there's something about that space. And my predecessor, Patrick Evans, who I credit for the music of Marquand now, and we sang everything. We sang spirituals. We sang more spirituals than I even knew growing up. We've sung the Western canon. We've sung global music. But it's amazing that in the midst of all the racial tension that happens, it's alive and vibrant here on campus, that when everyone comes into that space, which is a non-denominational space, singing does not, or making music or communal singing, it's almost like that's gone. That's gone because there's something about a body of people singing together that believes the same thing as Christians. When they come together to sing, I don't want to say it's invisible, or it's vanished, but it's something about bringing people together to sing various styles of music or sacred music, and not just something that they're used to at home. I mean, it brought me closer to church music, being in that space in Marquand Chapel. So I think that brings us closer to racial justice in our churches, in our pews and everything, of singing music outside of what we grew up singing, or what we know, what we go to, or as Walden says, as our go-tos, but actually expanding the repertoire. And Sandro, back to you. You're right. You called me out, and that's why it's actually one of my fears. One of my fears is actually not jumping out there and learning the various language. I mean, I do it, but out of fear, though, I probably do shy away from it. I never forget my first trip to Paris. I studied French for a year, and I knew the language. I was talking it left and right here. I got to Paris. I said, "Bon, hello." I just out of fear. So yes, you're completely right. I agree with you 1,000% about learning various languages and jumping out. It's one of my fears that you called out. Yes.
Yeah, and I think I want to name, Dr. Gums, just even in this space that we said would be safe, but would be maybe uncomfortable for some, or uncomfortable for all of us. Even as we name levels of integrity, authenticity, intentionality, and all of these important words that are just so deeply important for how we walk, there might be some among us in the audience who are still scared, right? And wrestle with appropriation as a director of music, or even in the pews. Am I singing that? Is it right that I'm singing this? Is it appropriate? And even that deep wrestling in that imperfection, right, is so deeply important. Maybe something, as Walden said, our go-tos that we haven't troubled yet, right? We haven't troubled our go-tos, which is important. And I wonder if there are other thoughts before we move to broader questions around appropriation that we haven't shared as much, or any more thoughts on that, because it is an important question as we move forward together. And what does that mean in terms of intentionality? Any other thoughts here before we open it up?
Well, I always ask churches, especially Episcopal churches, to name the people that are Episcopalians that have written the hymns in the hymnal. And, so we have quote unquote appropriated a bunch of music from Europe, and none of us seem to mind. And, we call it ours and Episcopal, which they're not. They may be Anglican some, but, and a lot of it is not sacred even, quote unquote sacred music, which I don't agree with. I think everything is sacred because I feel we are sacred. So, but, so I feel like sometimes we want to, I feel we need to do the work ourselves, and when we are doing that work, we're not going to be questioning whether, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that, because we're already living into that. How do we learn so that it's not appropriation? It takes time. Like when someone is part-time, I'm looking for some guidance. Whitney, but the thing is, like, I feel like, again, it's you, and you do it yourself. You get to learn other music, you get to listen to other music, etc. And then even in the part-time, which I never understand part-time in anything, especially in people of color, we have a bunch of priests that are part-time, doesn't work. But anyway, but that's a different podcast. I mean, that's a different webinar, right? So, however, I feel like we need to just learn for our own self. We will never get to social justice or social anything if we do not do the work for ourselves. And that includes music, that includes who we're reading, that includes who we're meeting, that includes our relationships. All of those need to be intentional. And if we truly want to have a change, and it's just, and just, like right now you see a bunch of people, like we're here, maybe not all of us have a lot of time to give. However, we could always, help each other in different ways, but follow different people. Right now, because of the pandemic, a bunch of churches have so many recordings online, and a bunch of churches that are not all white. And so if you haven't done that work of checking out churches that are, diverse, that's a very, easy one to go to right now. There's a bunch of churches that have very diverse music. Look them up, you know, and follow and check out what they've used, and then try to use that or another thing that they use. So anyway, those are just my, you know, my thoughts that I think about all the time when I go to churches, because especially now with COVID, we have a bunch of resources, free resources online that we should be taking advantage of.
Yeah, and as we try, Dr. Montes, as we move with that same level of intentionality and integrity to the music that we're looking at. Yeah. And I just wanted to see if we can now open it up and give a little bit more space to some questions that we might have from the audience and for those who are listening in. And I know that there has been much that has been shared that has been deep and profound, and maybe have troubled our own waters around a musical canon, as it were, Western or otherwise. And so I want to invite folks, if you aren't familiar with Zoom, if you'd go down to your reactions button and just click that. On the very bottom, you'll see raise hand. And as you do that, then I'll call on you and we can ask our esteemed panel those questions. So I think Jim, you've put up, I don't know if you've put up your hand. Okay. Yeah, you've clapped hand, but Jim, go ahead. Please ask your question.
Great panel discussion. I agree with Walden is making it normal that you have a variety of things and you create that. I think pointing out, oh, we're going to do a woman's piece this week or something, I think it just becomes part of the normal. And Janet, thank for all your work, particularly about, I've learned more about women composers and been trying to schedule it. My question is, where do the limit sometimes comes in appropriateness of, my choir just really would not do gospel well, and I think it would sound hokey for them to do it. I'm not sure I'm good enough to teach them, but I don't have a soloist that could just riff off and do that. I played a funeral. As I was listening to this, I was thinking I played a funeral in November at a church, and they did From Sister Act, you know, the Ave Maria, you know, and I was just cringing because the choir just didn't sound good on it. It just, you know, there's stretching the boundaries, but if it's just hokey and it just sounded awful, I was sorry I was there, but they seem to enjoy it and everything else. So I guess my question is, you know, I try to do diverse music, but sometimes there's a limit of the resources that you have, and you don't have percussionists or things. You try and reach out, but sometimes you don't have those. So how can you continue to try and stretch that with what you have to work with? I think that's my question.
I have certainly one response to that. And what made me think immediately is that, you know, in everything that the five of us represent on your screen here in this particular panel, there is really a rich diversity in every culture that we might represent. And that there are actually several ways that you can learn and find composers of different backgrounds. I'm thinking a little bit about non-idiomatic music by African American composers, which is a term that has kind of come out recently. And I think it's true too of what I've found specifically in my recent research about music by Asian American and Asian composers, is that you can find it in different styles, and that is an entry point that you can use, knowing that there is a pretty large history of colonialism around the world. There are people of all sorts of different backgrounds that do write music in styles that might be more familiar musically to what you are envisioning your choir might be comfortable with. So that's not really a solution, but that may be sort of a kind of a halfway point that you could meet that particular thought.
Thank you, Janet. Yeah, are there others who'd like to respond? And otherwise we can go to another. Yeah.
That was an amazing response, Janet. I'll piggyback off of that, saying yes. I mean, to say you wanted to do music by an African-American composer does not limit you to only gospel music. The concert spiritual, the Negro spiritual, even anthems by composers such as Ulysses K or Samuel Coleridge Taylor, Undine Smith Moore, recent composers, Marcus L.A. Garrett. I mean, there are a list, and I think Walden mentioned him earlier. I can probably find the link and put it in the chat. Nathaniel Dett, yes, our Nathaniel Dett. Yeah, has memes, various cantatas. But to also, if you want to challenge your folks to learn gospel music, do it. I mean, it's fun. I mean, it's great music. With the integrity, of course, as we mentioned earlier. And to be honest, I wouldn't want to hear my church choir growing up singing Palestrina. But we did it though, we did it. We pushed them to sing it. So I mean, yeah, it may not be the sound that you hear on the radio or the sound you desire, but I mean, or even calling someone in to say, hey, can you come and give a workshop on gospel singing or how to produce gospel music. I mean, that would be great. And all these names are coming up. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Gums. I'm seeing some more hands raised, so let's try and meet them. I have Steve. We just heard from a man, so I'll go to Katie. Katie.
Hi, my name's Katie. I'm the music assistant here at the Cathedral in Portland, Oregon. And I had a question that came up a couple months ago. We were doing one of Moses Hogan's spiritual arrangements, and the choir did a great job with it. But one thing that came up actually in staff meeting, not really so much in rehearsal, was the question of dialect. So this particular spiritual we were doing, Oh, the Blind Man Stood on the Road and Cried, which is phenomenal. But Moses Hogan actually wrote the text in the octavo in dialect. And the question came up of how are we going to represent this text in the bulletin, like printed, and also how are we going to sing this with our largely Caucasian choir. So I'm curious. I mean, I sort of have my approach personally to how I coach that, but I'm curious to hear what you all what you might do in that situation.
Yeah, that's a question that comes up almost probably every spiritual workshop I've been to. And I'm going to post a resource in the chat. Andre Thomas, you probably have this book, Katie. He speaks, actually, this is a chapter or a section on dialect and Negro spirituals. I don't have an answer, like a quick answer, besides, yeah, I mean, the speaking was different back then. I mean, especially most of Negro spirituals, they were sung out of here and weren't literate. They weren't literate. So I'm not offended by dialect. Some are, but Andre did write a great spiel about that. You may want to check out, or someone on the panel maybe want to chat about it with how they deal with it in their church choirs.
Thank you, Dr. Gums. We'll go to Stephen next. I mean, if there are no other responses. Yeah, Stephen.
Thank you. I appreciate being here tonight. We've done Moses Hogan and several others, and actually this coming Sunday we have scheduled Deep River as our anthem. And it's one of my choir's favorites to do, but when we started it, and I still get it when I get new singers into the choir, and it's not only combating my own historical biases from my background, training, upbringing, and those things, but also the biases that my singers knowingly and unknowingly bring into the rehearsal setting to learn. And what I find I'm having to do often is to go back and remind them of good singing technique, that they don't need to sing it a certain way in their mind, because they think if we're doing a spiritual, it should be done a certain way. However, it becomes almost a caricature, and vibrato gets really wild, and all of a sudden it's like, what are you doing? And they're like, well, it sounds this way. And I said, where? Because it's, have you listened to anything? So I'm wondering how how others approach that with my choir, my adults in our community are all Caucasian folks. My choristers, on the other hand, are 60% kids of color. Interestingly, though, their parents don't show up in church. And so I wonder, the other flip side of that is when we're doing things, is that partly because the music isn't necessarily speaking to them as parents? Is it more that they just don't feel the need for the church? There are probably lots of different potential answers for that. But back to my first question about how do I, as a conductor who's obviously trying to put a well-balanced program of repertoire, of diverse repertoire out for my choir, fighting through my own biases and historical things like that, but approach that with my singers, that at the end of the day, quality singing is quality singing, regardless of the style or the composer or anthem, and that we need to not turn it into a caricature of what we think a spiritual should sound like. So do you have strategies or things that work on that, or has anybody else had to deal with that same type of sort of struggle? Every time it comes about, we seem to have the same discussions and the same struggle.
Anybody from the panel that'd like to take that up? To what a important question, Stephen. Thank you for asking. Let's give that a moment for us to sit with.
I mean, I wonder if it's okay for me to cue Walden up here just to say something that I remember him saying to our choirs at Trinity on the Green, which is every moment that you are in choral leadership, even if you are 7 years old or you are 77 years old, that everything that you sing is meant to be choral leadership for the congregation. So that includes every hymn. It's really tempting, I think, for choirs in a pretty universal way to have put all this energy and focus and detail and attention into an anthem, and then the second that you're singing a hymn, you're like, oh, okay, this is something familiar, so I'm gonna let that slip. And that's something that Walden always told choirs, that, you know, every moment that you are there, it's that same level of vocal technique and that same level of choral leadership. So I wonder, Walden, if you might say something about that.
Well, I was thinking that going off of what Nat actually did in his opening part, that we take it as seriously and that we interpret it in the best way we can to treat it with the respect that it is due. You know, the no matter who the arranger is, I was thinking, but in particular, if it's a spiritual, rather than we treat this one way, somebody used maybe Sandra used the term, said, "Oh, that was fun." And it's like, well, gee, this is not fun. You know, we tend to put things into boxes like that. So I think we do need to say, yes, the message of this is just as important as anything that, say, Spock wrote or somebody else wrote, anything like that. How can we, as authentically as we can, as being the people that we are, bring that across? How can we help bring that to the congregation so they too, in a hymn, can sing it with us and can be with us? You know, our chief goal as the choir is to lead the congregation and strengthen and enable them. Our anthems are lovely and all that, but that's not really our chief job. Our chief job is to lead all the music of the service. So how to do that authentically for us, respectfully, is key.
Thank you, Walden. Thank you, Janet. Yeah. Thank you all for that. Ed, do you have a question?
Not a question, I guess a comment.
Okay.
I'm a member of Trinity, and I guess I'm approaching this with some impatience and frustration, which would be familiar to anybody from Trinity. As far as appropriation, I think it's a very difficult subject, but I know that we don't seem to have a problem singing "Lift Every Voice and Sing" every year on the Sunday near Martin Luther King Day, which is a Negro Black song. it's not a Western song, and all of us white people in the congregation have no problem belting it out, and I think that's, I think that's great. And I think the work that Janet and Carolyn have done in unearthing female composers who may be more undiscovered than composers of color is wonderful. But as people have said, this music has been around. I mean, I don't know if Florence Price wrote church music, but certainly Harry Burleigh, I think his name was, has written plenty of it. There are other composers, and we don't sing those at my church. And Lift Every Voice and Sing was a hymnal that was produced by the Episcopal Church in order to bring diversity into the singing, and it was in the pews. Up until 10 years ago, we had a choir. We had sort of two distinct services at 9 and 11, and the 9 o'clock choir, which was mostly white, did try to sing music that was different from the canon, some gospel. We may not have done it well, and maybe that was the wrong thing, but Lift Every Voice and Sing was there. Before that, I remember we had hymnals with, that had African American music from way back when. It seems like now we are mostly singing European white Western music, and I think that it's the idea that we now have to start looking because of George Floyd or some other reason to diversify our music is really doesn't wash with me. I mean, I think that we have had the opportunity to sing this music for a long time, and my church is mostly white. There are plenty of Black people and other races, but we're just not doing it, and it's kind of an open wound for me that we used to do it more than we do now, and that's what I have to say. I think we really need to get around to saying there are these composers. There's Florence Price. There's other women composers that we can incorporate. There are Black composers we can incorporate, and the hymns. It's like I'm sure there are many people in the pews who want to sing the stuff that's familiar, but if we keep doing that, we're not getting anywhere.
Right.
So
yeah, Ed, thank you so much for that. And Ed, thank you so much for naming tension within all of this, which is real, and in as much as we have named real opportunity of leaning forward with a deep sense of integrity and authenticity, and trying things on, it's important to name the tension and the fact that we're all here together trying on, and you are right. It should not have taken the murder of George Floyd for many of our eyes to be opened to a broader understanding of what is happening in this country, in all of its respective institutions and all of that. And yet, for many people within the United States, it has done just that. And so, paying attention to the moment, the Kairos moment, as it is, to be more whole, to really understand our own diversity in this country with a deeper sense of integrity and authenticity is so deeply important. So I resonate with much of what you're saying, and there's always opportunity for all of us to learn more and have our eyes peeled back a little bit more. So So thank you just for naming that. And I would invite us, folks, that, as we get closer to the end of the hour, of a source close to home, and Dr. Miroslav Volf, who shared, how important it is to become a Catholic person, right? And in not a large C, big C capital, but lowercase capital, lowercase Catholic person, in sense of being open to all people that we come across. And as we've moved through this panel, I hope that all of us have become more open to understanding our own integrity, understanding the cultures and races that we exist among, and how do we honor their own sense of authenticity and work together as we offer choral and church music. Just so deeply important. So I hope we sit in the tension, everybody, and walk with some sort of integrity. And I just want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank Dr. Gums, Walden, Dr. Montes, and Janet, just for leading us into this tension and into this space of opportunity. Thank you all so very much. And go in peace, everybody, to love and serve the Lord.
Peace.
Thank you all. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.